Hey guys, it's Homer. In keeping with my quest to have no consistent content on my channel, here's a movie review. Yeah, so you saw the title and thumbnail already. You know this video is going to be about Deadpool and Wolverine. While I've dipped my toes into review-type content before, I haven't really done a basic movie review yet, so this is going to be a first for my channel. Since this movie is pretty recent and I don't want to risk a copyright strike, I'm not going to show any of the movie besides maybe some brief moments in the trailers or promotional material, and instead opt to show some very mediocre Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 gameplay. Hey, the last 3 videos I made all contained Capcom fighting games in them. Maybe this channel does have consistent content after all. But enough preamble, let's just get into the review. I'll start off with some vague stuff in the beginning here for those who haven't seen it yet. When it comes down to would I recommend the movie to someone, I would say yes. I did enjoy it quite a bit. I think I could reasonably recommend it to the average moviegoer, and I think if you went into this thinking you were going to like it, you probably will. But going into further thoughts on that is probably going to require me spoiling the movie, so if you are still yet to see it and want to, this is the part where you click off now, and I hope you come back once you've actually seen it. Yeah, so I guess to fully discuss this movie, you kind of do need to explain the context into how or why it was really made. It's pretty common knowledge, but I'll still go through it. So while Marvel Comics did create the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and a bunch of other characters, they did not own the film rights to these characters once they sold them to 20th Century Fox, and so that's why all of the X-Men films have been made by them for the last 20 years or so. As such, when Disney acquired Fox in 2019, they got back all of the rights to all the characters that they sold off. As such, the first 2 Deadpool movies were made by Fox, but this one would actually be made by Marvel Studios, of course owned by Disney. And yeah, they make that pretty clear in the movie. As such, this movie does actually tie into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which the context behind that is a little messy, so to speak. Yeah, you don't really need me to be the 1 millionth guy to tell you that the MCU has fallen off really hard, but the MCU has fallen off really hard. Yeah, ever since Endgame, they couldn't really get their foothold back into the industry. They took the Star Wars approach of put a bunch of stuff onto a streaming service and hope that everybody watches it, and unfortunately, all the stuff that they were putting onto streaming services wasn't exactly of the highest quality. Of course, there were certain gems past 2020 that they had that people clung on to quite a bit, but for the most part, the MCU has been certainly floundering as of recently. They've had a much harder time capturing the attention of movie watchers and also making a profit, culminating in movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, legitimate contender for worst movie I've ever seen. But since they did now acquire the rights to Fox, that means they had the rights to use all of their characters. And one of the first things put into production with that was, of course, making a third Deadpool movie. It's been quite a while since I saw Deadpool 1, and Deadpool 2 I've never actually saw in full. I've only seen pretty much the second half of it. So this review is going to be Deadpool from a somewhat fresh perspective. I'll do a brief plot synopsis if you're watching this in the future and kind of forgotten some of what happened. But since the last movie, Deadpool, or Wade Wilson, has given up the Deadpool moniker and has sort of retired nice, just being a used car salesman and hanging out with all of his friends and family from the first 2 movies. But of course, this doesn't last for long, and he quickly gets captured by the TVA. I will hold my thoughts on them until later. Once in the TVA, he meets with an agent known as Mr. Paradox. He gets told that since Wolverine died in Logan, his universe is set to be completely erased. Although Wade is given the opportunity to go to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and be a part of the Avengers there. Of course, this does mean he will be leaving all of his aforementioned friends and family behind. Naturally, Deadpool is not exactly keen on this, so he decides to go throughout the universe and find a Wolverine suitable to replace the one that died. He eventually lands on a Logan who is clearly dejected and very, very drunk. Of course, him just bringing a new Wolverine into his world doesn't exactly work, so he gets sent to the Void, something that was shown off in the Loki TV show. Once there, him and Wolverine meet Cassandra Nova, who is ostensibly the villain of the movie. Despite possessing the means to escape the Void, she decides not to because she finds it more fun to just play around there, where she essentially is a god. After escaping her, Deadpool and Wolverine drive out into the forest and they fight and then meet a sort of ragtag resistance to Cassandra, being made up of Blade, Elektra, Gambit, and X-23. They create a plan to use Juggernaut's helmet to cut off Cassandra's telekinetic powers, and then force her to send Deadpool and Wolverine back to their dimension, as well as allow the Resistance to eventually defeat her. This plan essentially works, however, due to some meddling between Pyro and Mr. Paradox, Cassandra sends the two home, but goes along with them in order to take control of the TVA technology to destroy whatever timeline she wishes to. Starting with Deadpool's. Deadpool and Wolverine then need to team up to take down an entire legion of Deadpool variants, as well as save the timeline that Cassandra is trying to destroy. Of course, Deadpool and Wolverine are actually successful and are able to stop her. And the movie ends on a nice note that keeps it sort of vague as to whether Deadpool and Wolverine will actually continue to go on in the MCU. Alright, now to go more into an actual review of this movie. I'll first start off with talking about the action. I thought that the action was excellent. The choreography was great, and the CGI, for the most part, was pretty good too. A notable highlight to me needs to be the first fight scene in the movie where Wade kills a bunch of TVA agents with the adamantium skeleton of Logan. That was legitimately kind of an insanely funny and interesting concept, and the fight is set to NSYNC's Bye Bye Bye. Overall, I thought that scene was just amazing. It really set the tone for the movie and also served as a great showcase of Deadpool's comedic yet also brutal nature. Other highlights to me would need to be both fights between Deadpool and Wolverine. They're both very awesome fights between these two just unstoppable people that can't die trying to kill each other. Another highlight in the action would need to be the fight against the Deadpool Legion. The whole thing is shot as if it's one take, and I don't actually know if it was all one take, but it kind of does seem like it was, and it was very impressive and well choreographed. And it is also set to Madonna's Like a Prayer, which is a very good song. When it comes to fights I was kind of disappointed by, I would probably need to go with the fight between Wolverine and Sabretooth. They of course hyped it up in the trailer and also in the movie itself as being this big thing, and the joke is Wolverine just kills him by taking his head off immediately. To me, it feels like kind of a waste to use this iconic rivalry that pretty much a whole X-Men movie was about.
It's just so fucking lame.
Yeah, it is.
You know, like, holy shit, you got the actor back after all this time, the brother of Wolverine himself. They finally meet after all this time, and it's just like, oh, nope, Wolverine kills him instantly. Is it worth the joke?
It feels not right to waste this iconic rivalry just for a joke. On the topic of jokes, I might as well go over some of my favorites. I easily have to give a special highlight to the Henry Cavill cameo. Everything about that was funny to me. The fact that it actually was not bad casting, and of course Deadpool's line making fun of DC's treatment of Henry Cavill, which of course is true. He really did deserve better. Now, does this actually imply that Henry Cavill is going to work with Marvel in the future? I would imagine probably not. However, if he does end up landing a role, I wish him the best. He deserves it. I like Henry Cavill a lot. But it isn't just DC that Deadpool makes fun of. He even throws some jabs at the MCU at points, like when he mentions that Wolverine picked a low point to join the MCU, referencing the MCU's steady decline in quality over the past couple of years. I legit found jokes like that really funny. While this movie does still feel like an outsider that just happened to get its hands on the MCU's branding, it is still kind of cool that Marvel is able to sign off on a project that openly mocked them. And I hope in the future Marvel is kind of able to laugh at themselves a little bit and realize they've kind of lost the plot a little bit. I mean, the first step to fixing a problem is admitting there is one, right? Furthermore, a lot of the humor did also come from some of the characters that cameoed, a big one being Gambit, played by Channing Tatum. He kind of has a really strange accent going on. However, they do kind of make fun of that a few times in the movie, and it is admittedly kind of funny, and I thought he did play the character quite well. But then the other one would need to be Chris Evans' surprise return to the MCU, but not as Captain America, as Johnny Storm, which he played in the old Fantastic Four movies, of course made by Fox. I legit didn't see those coming, and I thought that was a really neat touch to go for. And after seeing the MCU kind of stumble with all the new characters and actors they've been bouncing around, it was legit very nice to see an iconic face return. But I guess you could say that for the whole movie, of course, with Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. Call it key jangling if you want, but I don't know, man. I like Chris Evans. On the topic of that, I guess I'll mention the cameos themselves. This movie does feature a lot of characters and actors from the Fox universe. Of course, there was the aforementioned Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, Chris Evans as Johnny Storm, etc. However, they do also have pulls from other Fox movies, like Wesley Snipes as Blade. Once again, I think there's an argument to be made that the MCU is kind of just going for cheap key jangling with our nostalgia, and it's something that I feel like they should try to avoid in the future. Praising this could inadvertently cause them to think, oh, we don't have to care about the quality, it just matters how many memorable faces can we bring back. But I think there is still an argument for doing it tastefully in a way that just gives the audience back a little bit of what they wanted. And to me, there is actual legitimate value in seeing how far we came from some of these characters. Some of them, even at the time, weren't exactly received well, and to see them come back and be given a bunch of spotlight and time to really show what they could have done if the right people were involved is, in my opinion, a nice shot at redemption, and I appreciate this movie for that. In addition, I need to give a special mention to Daphne Keane as X-23. Back when she played this character in Logan, she was 12 years old, so seeing her now play the character as a 19-year-old and having her story be about how much she cared about Wolverine and wants to help see him get out of the slump that he's in was legitimately nice to see. If you haven't seen Logan, that was an incredible movie, so even if it's not the Logan and Laura from that movie that we remember, still seeing them interact in this way, it's something that's special. You don't want to just bring back the face and use them to sell tickets. You want to remember people why they liked them in the first place, and progress things in a meaningful and entertaining way. And I think this movie excelled at that greatly. However, I do kind of have to go into some of my critiques now. I mentioned it before, but yes, now we are going to go into the TVA stuff. Yeah, so for those who haven't seen the Loki show, which I imagine is a lot of people that watch this movie, the TVA are probably a surprise to you. For reference, I only saw the first season of Loki, so if some of the information I'm giving you is a little inaccurate, that's probably why. The TVA is an organization that deals with timelines and variations of those timelines. They want to keep the order of the universe set in one path that goes along one sacred timeline. I do not like the TVA. I think they were an extreme burden on the MCU in general. They kind of removed the sense of free will from the universe. If there was any deviation from what the TVA decides is right, then they would just get expunged, and I think that takes a lot away from the universe. I mean, just in general, it takes a lot from the stakes. I mean, you tell me that the Avengers didn't have a 1 in 14 million chance of defeating Thanos, they always just would've, or else it would've disrupted the timeline? That's just completely nonsense to me, and I hate that. Furthermore, a lot of their rules just don't make sense to me. In this movie in particular, they introduce the concept of anchor beings, and when a universe loses their anchor being, it eventually fades from existence. They mention that this process takes multiple thousands of years, but I still don't understand the correlation, period. Why are anchor beings chosen? Is it a natural thing that they can't change? It doesn't make any real sense to me. Obviously, this is a plot device that's needed for the plot to work, but I hate that the TVA's very existence facilitates the necessity of things like this. When you introduce this powerful organization that dictates everything, you need to introduce these super intensely changing concepts that, in my opinion, break the world building of the whole franchise. It was a legit bad omen for this movie when we saw them in the trailer. In my opinion, the TVA are one of the absolute worst things to come out of the MCU in Phase 4, and they are part of what made me despise the Loki show as much as I did. I also don't really understand Paradox's logic here. If a universe is naturally going to die, why do you need to step in and kill it? Is it just some weird sense of him wanting to put a universe out of its misery? I don't really understand this. All in all, the TVA in general are kind of just a representation of everything I felt kind of ruined a lot of the Phase 4 movies. A lot of them focused on the multiverse as a concept, but they convoluted it to such a degree and were clearly written apart from any other interpretation that you have these movies that just have completely differing mentalities about what it actually was. I mean, in the first Doctor Strange movie, it is explicitly made clear what the multiverse is and that the Sorcerer Supreme knew about it. Of course, Doctor Strange 2 comes along and they act like that conversation never happens. And then in that movie, they say that any person that goes from one timeline into another one will inevitably cause an incursion that leads to the complete destruction of a timeline. Of course, they never explain how or why or how long, and the reason they didn't is because they didn't think about it and don't expect you to. But it overcomplicates the multiverse concept to me, and in my opinion, just makes things way harder to enjoy. I bring all this up because does this imply that every universe that Deadpool traveled to in the entire movie just will disintegrate at some point? I mean, I guess they would have already because of anchor beings being introduced now. I thought the first Spider-Verse movie's interpretation of it was fine. Someone who's outside of their timeline starts glitching up, and they need to return to their own timeline, or else they'll be destroyed. Extremely simple, easier to understand, moves the plot forward, and doesn't require an extra organization that completely ruins the world building of the universe. In addition, this movie also doubles down on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness's insistence that the MCU universe is Earth 616, and I dislike this. Up until that movie, the MCU universe was referred to as Earth 199999. And I liked this because it purposefully set the movies apart from the comics. Of course, it's a long-winded name that's hard to remember, but it helped, in my opinion, to keep the universe separate. Of course, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness said that it was Earth 616, which I dislike because, again, it convolutes things, and in addition, it means that Mysterio, who just made up a whole random story about multiverses in that movie, somehow accurate when he said that that movie's universe was Earth 616, despite everything he said in that movie being a lie that he just made up. I mean, the name Earth 199999 implies that there's 20,000, possibly more universes out there, and yet somehow he just guessed the correct one, I guess. I know all of this is a long-winded nerd rant that doesn't really pertain to Deadpool and Wolverine, but my main point with it is that the MCU's world building has degraded to complete nonsense, and Deadpool and Wolverine has kind of made that problem worse. It's ultimately a small thing in this movie, but I wonder how it will affect movies in the future. Going back to critiques in this movie, I thought Wolverine's backstory could have been handled a little bit better. The Wolverine in this universe is one from a timeline where all of the X-Men were killed by mutant hunters, and he wasn't there to help them. He feels immense grief over this, and feels partly responsible. I think this is a good concept, but there's a few problems with it. The main one being that we're never really shown it, it's just kind of mentioned. Another problem is that it's kind of said way too long into the movie. We get that he's sad and feels partially responsible for the destruction of his world, but we don't really get the specifics on it until right before the third act. Of course, the moment where he's telling X-23 this is a good character moment between the two of them, as I stated previously, but I would have liked that we actually get like a definitive flashback to it, or that we get a few more hints as to what actually happened beforehand. As it is, it kind of just comes out of nowhere, and I would have enjoyed a little bit more delving into this different interpretation of Logan's backstory. Next up, I want to discuss the CGI. It's not exactly a hot take to say that the CGI in recent Marvel movies has been quite hit or miss, and the reason why is clearly that the CGI artists get essentially no time to put these movies together, and I do legit feel bad for a lot of them. I mean, imagine having a 50-hour work week just to put this out into the world. Despite this, the CGI in this movie was actually pretty good for the most part. As stated, I thought all the action scenes were great, and especially in the first scene, we get a lot of CGI blood and adamantium bones. And all of it, in my opinion, looks really good, helped by the fact that it's set in a snowy location. Visually, I don't really have many complaints with this movie, although I will say once Wolverine puts on his mask near the end of the movie, there are a few shots that clearly are a CGI version of Hugh Jackman, and I think they look a little strange. I get that the man is in his mid-50s, so it's kind of hard to expect him to do all this crazy acrobatic stuff, but despite that, I feel like they could have at least used stunt doubles or something. But I want to just wrap up with once again explaining my main thoughts. I thought the story of the movie was still great, and the character arcs from pretty much every character was great. This was an action comedy where the fight scenes and jokes were great. This movie really does feel like a love letter to a different time in superhero movies. The Fox Marvel movies differed from the MCU. They were a lot less formulaic and really felt like they could experiment and do kind of whatever they wanted. A lot of the movies that were even direct sequels to other ones didn't even feel like they were in the same universe. And that's just kind of something that we don't really have anymore. Movies like Logan probably just couldn't exist in the MCU, and there's an appreciation for that style that can clearly be seen in this movie. As I said before, if you go into this movie with a thought process of you're probably gonna love it, you probably will. But if you're a Marvel fan, especially if you're a fan of the Fox Marvel movies or the X-Men at large, I would say it's a safe bet you will enjoy this movie quite a bit. And if you're looking for a good action comedy for the summer, and let's be real, there's not much coming out of Hollywood this summer, then I would say go give it a watch. Of course, though, this is R-rated, so maybe don't bring your kids. I mean, they probably won't get most of the jokes anyway, so. But there is something else I want to discuss. That being, where does the MCU really go from here? This is the only MCU movie being released this year, and I think that speaks to a change that's happening in Marvel. As I stated, people have not exactly been fans of what the MCU has been doing for the past couple of years. They've just been putting out way too much bad content way too fast. It's impossible to keep up with all of it, and even if it was good, I think there would be some burnout here. But is Deadpool Wolverine a return to form and a sign of better things to come? It's really hard to say. A lot of people are saying this movie is going to save the MCU, and no, it isn't. The next movie could be terrible and will be in the same spot again. However, I think this movie does represent a second chance that Marvel has. This movie that was good and sold a lot of tickets, if it leads into another movie, potentially being the next Captain America, that is good and sells a lot of tickets, it could represent a shift back to what people want from the MCU. That being fun action movies that might not be the greatest thing of all time, but they serve their purpose in being very entertaining and respectful to an extremely popular franchise. And I don't think think that we necessarily had that possibility before. If an MCU movie was good without this movie, it wouldn't really move the needle much for them. But judging how this was such a return to form, if the next Captain America movie is good, and those next Avengers movies that are being made by the Russo brothers again, with Robert Downey Jr. returning as Dr. Doom for some reason instead of Iron Man, okay, it could all point to the MCU actually bouncing back. I want to say it can't happen. I really don't want to hype myself up for something that could be terrible, but I don't know, man. I've just grown up with the MCU. It's been going on for 15 plus years now, and I love Marvel as a brand. All the characters, it just means a lot to me personally, and I really want to like them again. So while this movie, in my opinion, does not save the MCU, it represents the only chance I think the MCU has left to bounce back. Will they deliver? Only time will tell, but I feel like there is at least hope now. Here's to really hoping this doesn't age poorly. Well, that's all the nerd rambling I can take right now. I really don't want to look like those soy-jacking Redditors. However, if you enjoyed this unscripted movie review, let me know in the comments if there's anything else you want me to talk about. But I thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again. Peace.